To begin with, let me state that my mother has always yearned most for a daughter. For as long as I can remember, this was her dream. When she and my father found they were expecting their first child, which happened to be me, her enthusiasm was evident. All changed, though, the instant she discovered I would be a boy. She was quite let down. This was not something she kept to herself. She has really told me this story many times over my childhood, and it is abundantly evident that she had always wanted for a different result. Since my mother, especially, had her eye fixed on having a daughter, my parents did intend to have further children. Sadly, life had other intentions. My mother began having serious health issues shortly after birth, which over the years prevented her from carrying another child. She found great devastation in the thought of never being able to conceive once more. I can only image the emotional weight of that loss. It is one I believe she still bears today. She must have realized quite painfully that her desire of a daughter would never come true. Years later, my mother would talk of her wish for a daughter, a feeling that seemed to get stronger with time. She showered my female cousins with affection and attention that felt like a statement of the mother love she had always wanted to offer a daughter of her own. Whether it was with extra gifts, love, or just her treatment of them, she clearly connected to them differently than I did. Strangely enough, for most of my life, this behavior of hers did not really disturb me. I had come to see that this was simply how my mother was, hence I did not really take her fondness for my female relatives personally. She adored me, and for the most part I felt good about it. Until Sophia, my ex-wife, came into the picture, that is. Sophia was the daughter of my mother's long-lost best friend from high school, someone she had reconnected with following many years of estrangement. My mother was shocked by Sophia's beauty when she first met her and became focused on the thought that she would be the ideal match for me. I was unmarried at the time, and my mother had been really tenacious in trying to arrange different women for me, but none of those initiatives really stuck. But this time she was tenacious and resolved. She kept telling me how beautiful and amazing Sophia was, how much we would complement each other. And finally it started to almost consume her. I suffered her relentless attempts to push us together for weeks, until finally I gave in. To be honest, at that point I accepted to the blind date more in order to calm my mother than in any actual curiosity or interest. I simply wanted her to let me live my life and stop talking about Sophia. When I eventually saw Sophia, my initial impression mirrored all my mother had told me. She was most definitely rather gorgeous. But as the evening went on and we grew to know one another a little bit more, I came to see her beauty lacked meaning. What drives them, what their ambitions are, and what plans they have for their future. These are among the first things I always strive to know about someone. Sophia's response when I asked her what she wanted to accomplish with her life startled me. She informed me straightforwardly that her ideal was to be a stay-at-home mother. I started to get unhappy at that point. While desiring to start a family is not bad, at the time in my life I had rather different goals. I anticipated to be with someone who had goals outside of simply raising a family. I wasn't even considering having children anytime soon. Naturally, I then asked her what she intended to do in the interim before she had children. Her answer confused me even more. She said basically that she wanted to be a stay-at-home wife. Confused, I stared at her as she continued to say that, up until her dad died, her mother had always been a stay-at-home mom for as long as she could remember. This, in her view, was the key to her parents' happy marriage. Although I can appreciate that it worked for her family, it felt very different from what I was seeking for a mate. Whether in a career or a personal quest, I wanted someone passionate and motivated by a goal. At the time, my principles didn't line up with someone wanting to be a stay-at-home spouse from the beginning. Living with their uncle, who paid all their bills since her mother still didn't want to work, Sophia and her mother were unquestionably dissatisfied when I returned from that first date with Sophia. Mostly wanting to please my mother, I had entered the date with modest expectations. But walking out of it, I realized this wasn't what I was looking for. Naturally, when I expressed my opinions, my mother wasn't very happy. She was clearly unhappy, almost as though I had personally offended her by not giving Sophia what she saw to be a true chance. She said that if I just tried a little more, I would see what Sophia saw, and kept reminding me that I hadn't spent the time really getting to know her. But I had decided otherwise. As firmly as I could, I advised her that it would be better if we both went on and let the concept of us fade. Though I ought to have known better, particularly when she had her heart set on something. Or, in this case, someone. My mother was not someone who gave up readily. Not too long afterward, my mother asked me over to her house. Not unusual. She would regularly ask me to visit for supper or simply catch up. But when I got there this time, I also saw Sophia. My mother apparently invited Sophia over so she would compel another encounter between us. Once I got there, my mother and father dashed out the house, sporting nearly malicious looks, and yelled, "Enjoy your date." I felt completely ashamed. Sophia's response makes me quite certain she felt the same. We remained there for a time, uncomfortable, staring at one another. Neither of us knew quite what to say or how to approach the matter. It felt like being set up on a date you hadn't agreed to smack in the center of my own parents' house, with no getaway in view. Uncertain of what to do, we stood silently for a few minutes. I wanted to avoid embarrassing her more than I could have readily done by making an excuse and walking away. She was, after all, as much a victim of my mother's ferret matching as I was. Instead of running away, we both laughed awkwardly, realizing how strange the circumstances were, and finally we sat down to chat. Since we were already there and had nothing else to do, I decided I could as well ask her to share more about herself. She said, fairly candidly, that she had liked me following our first date and had assumed I would have liked her too. She then became perplexed, though, as I never followed up or tried to get in touch. Although she was a lovely and compassionate lady, I gently told her that since she wanted to be a stay-at-home wife, I felt as though our aims in life were very different. Sophia then clarified to me that her goal went beyond simply lounging about the house and activity. She began to explain more about her voluntary work at the church and how she committed her days to working with children and supporting others in need, even if we did not have children right now. Her justification changed my viewpoint. I began to see another side of Sophia, one I had not before really valued. Sophia first presented herself to me as essentially a really friendly, lovely person. Or at least that was how she seemed to be at first. She seemed to have found her calling in helping others, even if she wasn't particularly motivated by high personal objectives or job aspirations. That degree of kindness of spirit is exceptional. So I decided to ask her out on another date despite my misgivings and residual questions about our compatibility. Before we decided to move forward and become engaged, Sophia and I spent almost a year dating. During this time, I had also been promoted at work, which greatly raised my salary and provided stability. Once we were married, I felt financially enough to help Sophia. This gave me the confidence to pop the question to her. Still, the time of the proposal wasn't really my choice alone. Both of our mothers, especially mine, had been gently urging us to get married sooner rather than later. Though none of us had imminent intentions to start a family, they kept reminding us Sophia's biological clock was running. But their constant pressure was relentless, and their insistence made me believe that getting married sooner was the logical next step. When we at last got engaged, my mother handled the wedding preparations in line with her character. She insisted on holding a lavish ceremony, cut no expenses, and volunteered to pay for the whole affair personally. As if it were Sophia's own daughter's wedding, my mother was resolved to fulfill her dream, a gesture that was both kind and very overpowering. From the location to the flowers to the guest list, no element was too tiny for her to fix on. Though the ceremony turned out to be somewhat extravagant, far more elaborate than I had expected, watching how delighted Sophia was made all worth it. Following the wedding and the honeymoon, I hurried back into my work, picking up where I had left off, which was more taxing than usual from my recent promotion. Sophia moved into my house meanwhile, and she started to really embrace her role as a stay-at-home wife, exactly as we had planned before. Though true to her word, she kept volunteering at a church in my area, something she had always been enthusiastic about. She was an idol. But it wasn't long after we entered married life that I began observing some oddities in Sophia's daily schedule. Having never lived together before, I was discovering all these minute aspects about her daily routines that I had not known about during our courting. Her constant insistence on me sending money to her mother every month caught me especially. She said we had more than enough and that, as a decent son-in-law, it was my responsibility to assist her mother. Given that this was never mentioned before our marriage, I thought it strange. Her uncle looked after her mother's needs, so I had always assumed, but suddenly I was expected to make financial contributions. Second, Sophia would often go and return home somewhat late in the evening. She was a stay-at-home wife, hence I anticipated she would be more at home handling daily house chores, including cooking and cleaning. Rather, she would furiously start to make dinner late in the evening and usually seemed hurried when I arrived home from work. She would explain how she was assisting someone, whether it was a homeless person she came across or a child from the neighborhood who needed some direction, every time I asked about why she was getting home so late. Although I wanted to deter her from pursuing what she felt to be meaningful, at the same time I considered at least an awareness that, as a housewife, she would manage specific domestic tasks. This did not occur. Our dinners were usually late. She would toss something together right before. The house was hardly clean the way I expected it to be, and the washing never was done in time. At first I tried not to draw too much attention to it, but with time I grew frustrated. I started bringing it up with her, having numerous peaceful talks about how she might juggle her household obligations with her charity activities. She assured me every time she would improve and change, but the trend never altered. Late dinners, unfinished business, and justifications for her busy assisting others often told the same tale. One weekend, while she was once more out helping, I decided to surprise her at the church she mentioned. Maybe it would be good to spend some time with her in her element, and I reasoned I could even help her with anything if she needed it. Expecting Sophia to be in the middle of her voluntary activity, I inquired around the church when I got there. When I provided her name, the church members appeared perplexed, though, and following numerous inquiries it became evident that my wife had never volunteered there. Actually, nobody knew her at all. As I considered this, my gut started to knot. Sophia had been telling me for months following our marriage that she volunteered at this certain church, but now I was learning she hadn't even visited the location. I kept urging myself that perhaps I had made a mistake. Maybe she helped elsewhere nearby, or perhaps I misinterpreted the name of the church. I determined to be cool later that evening when she arrived home. She started her normal justification of how hard she had worked that day. Then I asked her casually how her day had gone, and she detailed all the people she had assisted and the things she had accomplished. Following her completion, just to find out, I asked her straight what church she had been helping at. She indeed repeated the name of the church I had visited earlier, the same one I had been informed she didn't work at. It was then abundantly evident that something was quite wrong. Sophia had been lying to me about where she was spending her time not once but rather consistently. It was more than simply a straightforward misinterpretation. She had been purposefully misleading me, and I had no idea why. She was actually doing all day what exactly? Why was she continually lying to me? Clearly something was wrong, and I was resolved to find out. Rather than reporting to work as normal the next day, I parked my car a few feet from our house, far enough to be out of sight, but close enough to monitor Sophia. I had decided I would follow her and find out where she spent her day. For this entire suspicion to be a misinterpretation, I wanted her to show me wrong, to go to the church like she always said, and so validate me. Later, I was even psychologically getting ready to tell her I had let my insecurities control me and apologize for questioning her. But what happened next was something I never could have ready for. I observed her leaving the house 1 hour after I left. But instead of the typical conservative attire she wore around the house or around me, she was dressed totally differently, in shorts and a tank top, an outfit I had never seen her wear before. I saw her get into the car, and instead of heading toward the church as I had anticipated, she shot off in the other direction. My heart began to fly. I trailed her, keeping a few vehicles behind to minimize drawing attention. I kept reminding myself that a rational answer had to exist. She might be on an errand. She might be seeing someone else from the church. Perhaps, possibly, maybe. She finally settled into a peaceful area and parked in front of a house I could identify. From what I knew, it wasn't her mother's property, and none of her cousins owned either. I watched a man meet her leaving the house. Watching them class sank my heart. Then, to my great surprise, they kissed in the driveway. Like it seemed most natural to them, they clutched each other, arms encircling one another. I lacked breathing. Except I was the one braking, so there was nothing I could do to stop it. It was like seeing a slow-motion car crash. I attempted to grasp what I had just witnessed while my hands tightened around the driving wheel. With arms around one another, Sophia and the man then returned inside the house as if they had done 100 times already. I became ill. One thing appeared obvious to me. This was not a one-time error or a throw out of chance. Their interactions and their familiarity with each other made it quite evident that this was a long-standing romance. My heart seemed to have come out of my chest ripped. Now all the questions, the unusual timings, the bizarre justifications began to make sense. She had been living 2 lives, lying to me about her whereabouts while engaged in this affair just beneath my close proximity. I felt first like phoning my mother. I wanted to scream, tell her everything, hear her voice, and find some kind of solace. But I knew if I informed her, she would surely call Sophia right away, either out of shock or wrath, and that would set Sophia off. At least not now. I wanted Sophia not knowing that I had discovered something. I was in need of evidence. I wanted specific proof of her affair so that, when the time came to face her, I would have all I needed to call off this marriage. I had to use smart thinking. 2 weeks following that startling revelation, I focused all of my efforts on compiling the proof I required to at last face Sophia and start the divorce. I visited with a lawyer during this period to make sure, should the divorce proceed, my assets would be safeguarded as much as possible. Knowing Sophia and I lacked a prenuptial agreement, I wanted to make sure the ramifications from this betrayal wouldn't send me bankrupt. The evening I did at last face Sophia felt strange. Calmly seated her, I told her I knew about her affair. First startled, she even sought to refute what I was stating by arguing. Still, I had come ready for this. I showed her one by one all the proof I had gathered over the last month. Pictures of her with the man, screenshots of their text exchanges from her phone, and even documentation of the days she had lied to me about attending church. She knew there was no way to argue her way out of this with every piece of proof I turned up. At last she grudgingly came clean. She said the man she was seeing was her high school boyfriend, which I had already determined from some investigation and could find on Facebook, saying she was simply being dumb and that she was only playing around with him. Nothing major. She sought to minimize the entire event. She insisted she had no intention of things developing as far as they had. I wasn't finding purchase in it. Looking her in the eyes, I told her straightforwardly that I was going to divorce her. She stared in wonder. She believed in some measure she could talk her way out of it, that I would either pardon her or be moved by her justifications. She battled it, though, when she understood I was serious. Saying she could change and we could work things out, she implored me to rethink. Her appeals, however, went unheeded. Knowing that staying would never allow me to trust her once more, I knew. I gently instructed her to get ready and head out. I set up a group conversation with my parents and Sophia's mother to ensure there would be no misunderstandings or attempts at situational manipulation for our family. I spelled everything very precisely in the chat. I forward all the evidence of Sophia's adultery, the pictures, the text messages, everything. I wanted them to know the whole truth about why I was divorcing her, and I wanted to stop either Sophia or her mother from spinning any untrue stories. I knew that once the story leaked, all hell would erupt and I wasn't going to allow room for any misinterpretation. The responses were sharp as predicted. Furious that Sophia had betrayed her, my mother was totally enraged. But she and Sophia's mother couldn't help but ask me to change my mind at the same time. They begged me to find it in my heart to pardon Sophia and give her another chance even though the indisputable proof of her adultery. Fortunately, my parents supported me. He reassured me that, given the situation, no one should remain with a dishonest partner. I was making the correct option. He encouraged me to go forward with the divorce and that I deserved better. Sophia and her mother unexpectedly showed up at my house 1 week following my divorce filing. Sophia told me she carried my child in her womb. I started to doubt right away. Given her infidelity, I flatly objected to becoming the father. Sophia's mother screamed at me, charging me of wrecking her daughter's life by divorcing Sophia so quickly and not taking responsibility for the kid. She painted me as the one acting cruelly. Later on, my own mother focused especially on her pleadings. She spoke on how children may change a marriage and how having a baby might bring Sophia and me closer, as if the pregnancy were some magical cure for the adultery. She informed me Sophia had sworn to never cheat once more and that I should think ahead for the child rather than only for my own pride. She made me feel like the bad person for deciding to leave a marriage in which trust had vanished. When I still refused her logic, my mother, in her despair, threatened to testify against me in court when the time came, especially if the matter of child support surfaced. Whether or not the baby belonged to me, she insisted she would see to it I paid for it. DNA doesn't matter. Family is family, she said, suggesting she didn't give a damn about the biological father. Though it meant contradicting me in court, she was resolved to claim the youngster as her granddaughter. She then carried on just that. As promised, my mother spoke against me during the divorce process, which was among the most agonizing betrayals I have ever known. I battled closely with my attorney to ensure the court knew Sophia had been disloyal, and that the child might not be mine, that is with great actual likelihood. However, Sophia's mother and mine's mother attested that Sophia's affair was not anything sexual, downplaying her adultery as though it had been some kind of honest error. They further claimed that since Sophia and I had been close just weeks before our divorce, right about the time I found her affair, the baby has to be mine. Only fortunately, at last, the court decided that child support or paternity cannot be decided upon until after the birth, and a necessary valid paternity test had to be done. It would only be clear then whether or not I was the biological father. I was relieved. In what had been a taxing and agonizing procedure, it felt like a little triumph. At least now, without strong evidence, I wouldn't be compelled to help a child that might not be mine. Still, my mother, Sophia, and her mother were enraged with the result. Later on, my mother approached me to say she wished I wasn't her child. And if I were a real guy, I should pull my genes up and consider Sophia's child as mine, independent of the findings of the paternity test. My mother has gone bad-mouthing everyone in our family over the past few months, making me out as the villain who wrecked my marriage over what she said was only Sophia's one-time error. Whatever the degree of evidence I offered or the number of rational arguments I made, holding fast to her story, my mother blamed me for all that had gone wrong. You can therefore picture my delight when the day for the paternity test results arrived at last. This week, Sophia had a girl, and we right away scheduled the test. As might be expected, the baby did not belong to me. Sophia started crying when I showed her the results and begged me to welcome the child. If I didn't get involved and take responsibility, she said, her friends and relatives would reject her and her daughter. Although I was deeply sympathetic to her circumstances, it had no effect on my status as not the father. I'm sorry, but I can't do that, I said to her firmly. I no longer have responsibility. Sophia has kept calling me and leaving voice notes asking me to give some thought since then. Update 1. Sophia is arguing, for everyone wondering, that since I most likely won't have children anytime soon, though she betrayed me, I should consider this baby as mine. She also mentioned her high school sweetheart, the man she was having an affair with, had turned down marriage. She had to first marry me as he really has never been ready to settle down. She obviously wanted to keep her romance with him while using me as a cash flow source. Though at this point I simply don't care anymore, honestly I hope she at least brings him to court for child support. Update 2. I published a Facebook post formally stating that Sophia's child's father is not me following everyone's advice. After Sophia had cheated on me, I was sick of my mother defending her and wanted to humiliate her exactly as she had done to me for months on nonstop. Well, let me say what I guess. She called me enraged after I posted calling out my mom for supporting Sophia because others had started to turn on her. Ironically, she accused me of betraying her, that is, of turning on her by testifying against her in court, and seeking my payment of child support. Many of Mom's friends and family had originally agreed with her, but now, given the paternity test findings, it is quite evident that my mother was incorrect regarding Sophia. People are calling her out in the comments of my post as well as personally, telling her I am the real victim in this circumstance and she has to be a better mom to me. Mom called to shout at me, and she and Dad got into a major argument. Her continual bullying of me and her threat to leave her should she fail to quit her wild concept of making me accept Sophia's child infuriated him, even if it's not mine. Update 3. My previous update was 5 months ago. This past month, my parents have chosen to split up. This is so since my mother has not changed and even began calling Sophia's baby grandma. Every month she has been sending Sophia money. She also offers to watch her child. She seems to be at last realizing her long-lost daughter dream, exactly as she had always hoped. But my dad feels this is borderline inappropriate, hence he is bored of this. Thus has nothing to do with Sophia or her child. This has caused several arguments in which my mother has avoided responsibility. My dad has thus moved out and been staying with me. That my mother is choosing to give the daughter of my unfaithful ex-wife first priority above her own family hurts. Still, my dad will be proceeding with the divorce after discussing